Good evening. Tonight, we descend into the most dangerous realm ever conceived by the human imagination, the world of ancient Greek mythology. This is not the sanitized version you learned in school, where heroes always triumph and gods embody justice. This is the true mythological landscape, a place where divine beings act with the casual cruelty of bored children breaking their toys, where mortals are punished for crimes they didn't know they committed, and where even the mightiest heroes meet fates so terrible that death would be a mercy. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why no modern person, no matter how clever, strong, or virtuous, would survive even a single day in this realm of capricious gods and inescapable doom. Before we descend into this chaotic realm of divine fury and mortal suffering, leave a comment below telling me what country you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Think of it as your personal offering to the gods before we continue. Picture this. You wake up tomorrow morning, but instead of your familiar world, you find yourself in ancient Greece. The sun rises over marble temples where gods who care nothing for human morality hold court. The air itself seems thick with the weight of curses yet to be spoken, and every choice you make could trigger a punishment that will echo through generations. You think you understand right and wrong, but here, the rules are written by beings whose logic is as alien as their power is absolute. This is why you wouldn't last a day in Greek mythology, not because you're weak, but because the very concept of survival in this world is an illusion. The gods don't play by rules, you understand. Monsters roam freely through both wilderness and civilization, and fate itself is a trap from which no mortal can escape. Even if you tried to live quietly, avoiding heroic quests and divine attention, you would discover that in this world, anonymity is no protection, virtue is no shield, and innocence is no defense. Let me show you exactly what awaits you in this realm where death is often a kindness and where the most terrifying words in any language are, "A god has noticed you." Your first day in mythological Greece begins with what seems like a simple act of worship. You approach a temple of Artemis, goddess of the hunt, carrying offerings of fruit and flowers. You've done your research, you think. You know she values chastity and the protection of young animals. You're respectful, humble, even reverent. But as you kneel before her altar, you make a fatal mistake. You glance up at her statue and, for just a moment, you think how beautiful she looks. Not with lust, but with the same aesthetic appreciation. You might feel looking at a work of art. That moment of admiration seals your doom, you see. Artemis doesn't distinguish between artistic appreciation and sexual desire. To her, any man who looks upon her beauty with anything but the most clinical detachment has committed a violation worthy of death. You don't know this yet. You complete your offering, feeling virtuous and respectful, and you leave the temple, thinking you've done well. But Artemis knows. She always knows. The first sign comes at sunset. You're walking through the forest, perhaps gathering wood for a fire, when you hear the baying of hounds. Not ordinary hounds, but the supernatural pack of Artemis herself. You run, of course, but you cannot outrun divine justice. The hounds catch you, and as their teeth sink into your flesh, you transform. Your body stretches and changes. Your hands become hooves. Your voice becomes the plaintive cry of a stag. The very hounds that were hunting you now feast on your transformed flesh, tearing you apart while you're still conscious, still aware of what you've become. This is the fate of Actaeon, the hunter who accidentally glimpsed Artemis bathing, but in this world, accident and intention are meaningless distinctions. The gods punish the result, not the motive. Your innocent appreciation of beauty becomes a crime punishable by the most horrific death imaginable. And this is just one goddess on one day. There are 12 major Olympians, each with their own incomprehensible rules, their own triggers for divine wrath. Zeus might strike you down for showing too much pride or not enough. Hera might destroy you for existing near something that reminds her of her husband's infidelity. Poseidon might drown you for walking too confidently beside the sea. Athena might curse you for weaving too skillfully, or for thinking too highly of your own intelligence. You cannot win this game, because you don't even know you're playing it. Consider the fate of Niobe, a mortal woman whose only crime was loving her children too much. She had 14 children, 7 sons and 7 daughters, and in her maternal pride, she made a comparison. She said that she was more blessed than Leto, the goddess who had only 2 children, Apollo and Artemis. It was a moment of human weakness, the kind of boastful pride that any parent might feel. But in the world of Greek mythology, such momentary lapses of judgment become generational curses. Apollo and Artemis, hearing their mother insulted, descended from Olympus with their silver bows. They found Niobe's children, these innocent young people who had committed no crime except being born to a proud mother, and they killed them all. One by one, the divine twins shot down every child. The sons fell first, then the daughters, each arrow finding its mark with the precision that only gods can achieve. Niobe watched it all, powerless to intervene, powerless to protect the children she had boasted about loving so much. When it was over, when all 14 children lay dead, Niobe wept so intensely that she turned to stone. But even in stone, she continued to weep, forever. The gods had transformed her grief into a permanent monument to the price of offending them. She became a mineral formation on Mount Cyprus, where even today moisture seeps from the rock during certain seasons, as if the mountain itself is crying. This is the world you've entered. A world where loving your children too much is a crime, where momentary pride becomes eternal punishment, where the gods' justice is indistinguishable from their cruelty. But perhaps you think you're smarter than these mythological figures. Perhaps you believe you can navigate this treacherous landscape by keeping your head down, avoiding boasts, steering clear of divine attention. This is the fatal arrogance of modern thinking. You believe that if you're careful enough, humble enough, you can survive. But the gods of Greek mythology don't require your participation in their games. They create the rules, they change the rules, and they punish you for rules you never knew existed. The morning of your second day in this mythological nightmare begins with what appears to be good fortune. You've survived the night, somehow avoided divine wrath, and you're starting to think maybe you can learn to navigate this world. Then you meet another mortal, someone who seems to have mastered the art of survival here. He's confident, skilled, and he offers to teach you the ways of this strange realm. His name is Tantalus, and he's a king favored by the gods. So favored, in fact, that he's been invited to dine with them on Mount Olympus. He tells you stories of these divine banquets, how the gods treat him almost as an equal, how they've shared their secrets with him. You think you've found a mentor, someone who can guide you through the maze of divine politics. But Tantalus is about to commit an act so heinous that it will define the very concept of eternal punishment. You see, being favored by the gods has made him arrogant. He begins to think that if the gods trust him with their secrets, perhaps he can trust them with his. He wants to test their omniscience, to see if they're truly as all-knowing as they claim. So he does something that even by the standards of Greek mythology, is unspeakably evil. He kills his own son, Pelops, cuts the body into pieces, and serves it to the gods as a meal. He wants to see if they'll notice, if their divine senses can detect the difference between human flesh and the usual ambrosia of their feasts. The gods notice immediately, of course, all of them except Demeter, who was so grief-stricken over her lost daughter, Persephone, that she's not paying attention and accidentally eats part of the shoulder. But the rest of the Olympians recognize exactly what they've been served, and their fury is beyond description. They don't just punish Tantalus. They craft a punishment so perfectly tailored to his crime that it becomes the definition of eternal torment. They place him in Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld, where he stands in a pool of water that recedes whenever he tries to drink. Above him hang branches heavy with fruit that rise out of reach whenever he tries to eat. He is condemned to eternal hunger and thirst, forever tantalized by relief that will never come. This is where we get the word tantalize, from the eternal suffering of a man who thought he could play games with the gods. But the gods aren't finished. They resurrect Pelops, replacing his eaten shoulder with one made of ivory, and they place a curse on Tantalus's entire bloodline. The house of Tantalus becomes synonymous with generational horror. His descendants will murder each other, commit incest, and suffer fates that make death look like a reward. The curse will flow down through generations, affecting children who haven't even been born yet, all because one man decided to test the gods' omniscience. You're learning that in this world, the gods don't just punish individuals, they punish bloodlines, they punish entire cities, they punish people who haven't even been born yet. The concept of individual responsibility is meaningless when divine. Justice operates on a scale that encompasses generations, and you're beginning to understand something even more terrifying. The gods don't just punish evil, they punish curiosity, they punish intelligence, they punish the very qualities that make humans human. Tantalus wasn't evil when he began his relationship with the gods. He was simply a mortal who dared to treat divine beings as equals, who let familiarity breed the kind of casual arrogance the gods find unforgivable. This is your second lesson in survival. There is no safety in divine favor. The gods' attention is not a blessing, it's a curse that hasn't activated yet. The closer you get to them, the more likely you are to trigger their wrath. But keeping your distance won't save you either, because the gods play games on a scale that encompasses all of mortal existence. Consider the Trojan War, a conflict that began not with human ambition or political necessity, but with a divine beauty contest. Three goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, couldn't agree on who was the most beautiful. They forced a mortal, Paris of Troy, to judge between them. Each goddess offered him a bribe. Hera offered power, Athena offered wisdom, and Aphrodite offered the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite, and she gave him Helen of Sparta. The problem was that Helen was already married to Menelaus, the king of Sparta. When Paris took Helen to Troy, it launched a war that would last 10 years, kill countless thousands, and end with the complete destruction of one of the greatest cities in the ancient world. Think about this for a moment. An entire civilization was destroyed because three goddesses couldn't resolve a petty dispute about beauty. Thousands of warriors died, families were torn apart, and cities were reduced to ash. All because immortal beings treated mortal lives as pieces on a game board. The Trojan War shows you the true scale of divine indifference. The gods don't start wars because they care about human justice or political stability. They start wars because they're bored, because they're vain, because they want to see what will happen when they push mortals in certain directions. They bet on the outcomes like spectators at a gladiatorial contest, cheering for their favorites and interfering when the game isn't going their way, and the mortals caught in these divine games have no choice but to play their assigned roles. Paris couldn't refuse to judge the beauty contest. Helen couldn't resist Aphrodite's power. The warriors on both sides couldn't walk away from a war that served no human purpose. They were all trapped in a story written by beings who viewed their suffering as entertainment. This is what you're up against in the world of Greek mythology. Not just the threat of individual punishment, but the constant possibility that you'll be swept up in some cosmic game that has nothing to do with your choices or your character. The gods might decide to use your city as a battlefield, your family as a test case, your entire civilization as a cautionary tale. You're not just fighting for your own survival. You're fighting against the fundamental nature of a reality where immortal beings with the emotional maturity of spoiled children hold absolute power over life and death. By your third day in this mythological hell, you've begun to understand the rules. Don't offend the gods. Don't get too close to them. Try to avoid their attention entirely. You think you're learning to navigate this dangerous world, but then you discover the cruelest truth of all. Even if you do everything right, even if you're clever and careful and virtuous, you're still doomed. Because in Greek mythology, fate is not something you can avoid. It's something you fulfill, often through the very actions you take to prevent it. Meet Oedipus, a man whose entire life is a demonstration of fate's inescapability. Before he's even born, an oracle delivers a prophecy to his father, King Laius of Thebes. Your son will kill you and marry your wife. It's a horrific prediction, but Laius thinks he's clever enough to prevent it. When Oedipus is born, Laius has the infant's feet pierced and tied together, then gives him to a shepherd with orders to leave him on a mountainside to die. The shepherd, moved by pity, can't bring himself to kill an innocent baby. Instead, he gives the child to a shepherd from Corinth, who brings him to the childless king and queen of that city. They raise Oedipus as their own son, never telling him about his true origins. They think they're saving him, but they're actually ensuring that the prophecy will come true. Oedipus grows up believing he's the prince of Corinth. He's intelligent, strong, and destined for greatness. But then he hears a rumor about his parentage, and consults the same oracle that prophesied his fate to his birth father. The oracle tells him the same terrible prediction: you will kill your father and marry your mother. Horrified, Oedipus does exactly what his birth father did. He tries to outwit fate. He leaves Corinth immediately, determined never to return to the city where he believes his parents live. He thinks he's being noble, sacrificing his own happiness to protect the people he loves. But fate isn't something you can outrun by changing your address. On the road away from Corinth, Oedipus encounters a group of travelers at a crossroads. There's a dispute about right of way, tempers flare, and violence erupts. Oedipus kills several of the travelers, including an older man who, unbeknownst to him, is King Laius of Thebes, his real father. The first part of the prophecy is fulfilled not through patricidal ambition, but through a random roadside altercation. Oedipus continues to Thebes, where he finds the city terrorized by the Sphinx, a monster with the body of a lion, the wings of an eagle, and the head of a woman. The Sphinx poses a riddle to all who would enter the city. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? Those who answer incorrectly are devoured immediately. Oedipus, with his quick mind and confident nature, solves the riddle. The answer is man, who crawls as a baby, walks upright as an adult, and uses a cane in old age. The Sphinx, defeated, throws herself from a cliff. Oedipus has saved the city, and, as a reward, he's offered the throne of Thebes and the hand of the recently widowed queen. Jocasta. He accepts both, thinking he's achieved a great victory. He doesn't know that Jocasta is his mother, the woman who gave birth to him before his father tried to have him killed. Their marriage is loving and produces 4 children. For years, Oedipus rules wisely and lives happily, completely unaware that he's fulfilling the very prophecy he tried so hard to avoid. But fate is patient. It doesn't need to rush. It can wait years for the perfect moment to reveal its trap. That moment comes when Thebes is struck by a plague. The gods have cursed the city, and the only way to lift the curse is to find and punish the murderer of the previous king. Oedipus, being a conscientious ruler, launches a thorough investigation. He vows to find this killer and bring him to justice, not knowing that he's hunting himself. The investigation leads him inexorably toward the truth. Witnesses are questioned, evidence is gathered, and slowly, horribly, the reality of his situation becomes clear. He killed his father at the crossroads. He married his mother. He had children with the woman who bore him. Every step he took to avoid his fate led him directly into it. When Jocasta realizes the truth, she hangs herself. When Oedipus understands what he's done, he takes the brooches from her dress and uses them to blind himself. He can't bear to see the world that has revealed such horror, and he certainly can't bear to see his children, who are also his siblings, the products of an incest he committed unknowingly. This is the nature of fate in Greek mythology. It's not a force that you can negotiate with or outsmart. It's a trap that's built into the very structure of reality. The actions you take to avoid your fate are the actions that cause it. The knowledge that's supposed to save you becomes the knowledge that destroys you. Free will is an illusion, and the gods' prophecies are not warnings, they're promises. But Oedipus's story doesn't end with his self-blinding. The curse extends to his children, because in this world, the sins of the fathers are always visited upon the children. His sons, Eteocles and Polynices, kill each other in a civil war over the throne of Thebes. His daughter Antigone dies for the crime of trying to bury her brother's body according to religious law. His other daughter Ismen lives but bears the shame of her cursed bloodline. The prophecy that began with one man's birth encompasses generations of suffering. Children who had no choice in their father's actions, who committed no crimes except being born into the wrong family, pay the price for a fate that was sealed before they existed. This is what you're facing in your 3rd day in Greek mythology. Not just the threat of personal doom, but the understanding that doom is inevitable. You might think you're cleverer than Oedipus, that you would see the trap he fell into. But fate doesn't use the same trap twice. It tailors its snares to each individual, using their own strengths and virtues against them. If you're brave, fate will use your courage to lead you into danger. If you're intelligent, it will use your cleverness to outsmart yourself. If you're kind, it will use your compassion to put you in situations where kindness becomes a fatal weakness. There is no virtue so pure that fate cannot corrupt it, no strength so great that it cannot be turned into a weakness. And the gods, they watch it all with the detached interest of spectators at a play. They don't create fate, but they don't oppose it either. They understand that fate is the fundamental principle that governs mortal existence, and they've made their peace with a reality where free will is meaningless and every story ends in tragedy. You're beginning to understand that survival in this world isn't about being smart or strong or virtuous. It's about accepting that survival itself is impossible, that the best you can hope for is to face your inevitable doom with whatever dignity you can muster. But even dignity is a luxury that not everyone in this world is allowed to keep. Your fourth day in this mythological wasteland begins with a revelation that chills you to your core. The monsters aren't hiding in remote caves or distant islands. They're walking among the people, integrated into daily life, accepted as part of the natural order. This isn't a world where civilization provides safety from the wild. This is a world where the wild has invaded civilization so thoroughly that people have learned to live with horrors that would drive you insane. You're walking through what appears to be a normal Greek city when you notice something wrong with the people around you. They're avoiding eye contact with a particular woman in the marketplace, but not in the way you'd avoid someone dangerous or unpleasant. They're averting their gaze in a very specific pattern, looking down or to the side, never directly at her face. She's buying bread, conducting normal business, but everyone who serves her keeps their eyes carefully fixed on her hands or the ground. This is your first encounter with one of the Gorgon sisters, and you don't know it yet, but looking at her face will turn you instantly to stone. The woman is Steno, one of Medusa's immortal sisters. Unlike her more famous sibling, Steno wasn't cursed by Athena for being violated in the goddess's temple. She was born monstrous, born with the power to petrify anyone who looks directly at her. But she's also immortal, which means she's been part of this community for generations. The people have learned to accommodate her presence, to conduct business with her, to treat her as just another resident of their city. Think about what this means. This community has adapted to having a creature of such lethal power living among them that a single careless glance means instant death. Children are taught from birth never to look directly at the Gorgon lady. Merchants have developed elaborate systems of mirrors and reflective surfaces to serve her safely. The entire social structure of the city has been modified to accommodate something that should be impossible to live with. But you don't know any of this. You're new here, and when you see someone buying bread, your natural human instinct is to look at them. You turn toward Steno, your eyes beginning to rise toward her face, and in that moment, you're saved only by a stranger's hand grabbing your head and forcing your gaze downward. Never look at her face, the stranger whispers urgently. Never, ever look at her face. You've come within seconds of death, and you didn't even know you were in danger. This is what daily life is like in Greek mythology. Instant death lurks in the most mundane interactions. The rules for survival are complex, unspoken, and failure to follow them is immediately fatal. But the Gorgons are almost civilized, compared to what else roams freely in this world. As you continue through the city, still shaken by your near experience, you hear screaming from a nearby neighborhood. Not the kind of screaming that comes from accident or illness, but the specific, terror-filled screaming that comes from encountering something that shouldn't exist. You follow the sound, against every instinct for self-preservation, and you find a scene that will haunt you forever. A creature with the head and chest of a beautiful woman, but the body of a bird of prey, is perched on a rooftop, holding a struggling child in its talons. This is a harpy, and it's not just hunting for food. It's hunting for sport, for the pure pleasure of terrorizing mortals. The harpies were originally wind spirits, but they've devolved into something far more malevolent, They snatch people, especially children, and carry them off to remote locations, where they toy with their victims before killing them. They're intelligent, cunning, and completely without mercy. They can speak, which makes their cruelty even more horrifying. They taunt their victims, describing in detail what they plan to do to them. But here's the truly terrifying part. The harpies are considered a natural part of the ecosystem. They're not an invasion or an infestation. They're simply another predator species, like wolves or bears, except they hunt humans specifically, and they enjoy the psychological torture as much as the physical killing. The people of the city organize hunting parties to drive the harpies away from populated areas, but they always come back. They're immortal, indestructible, and they have nothing but time. They can afford to be patient, to wait for the perfect moment to strike. They've learned human patterns, human weaknesses, and they exploit them with the kind of intelligence that makes them far more dangerous than any mindless beast. You watch in horror as the harpy on the rooftop spreads its wings and prepares to fly away with its victim. The child's parents are screaming, reaching upward helplessly, but there's nothing they can do. The city guards are shooting arrows, but the harpy is too high, too fast, too agile. It laughs at their efforts, a sound like wind chimes mixed with the cry of a dying animal. Then it's gone, disappearing into the sky with its prize, leaving behind only the echo of the child's screams and the grief of parents, who know they'll never see their child again. This is normal. This is Tuesday afternoon in a Greek city. Monsters don't stay hidden in remote dungeons waiting for heroes to find them. They integrate into the world. They establish territories. They develop hunting patterns. The people adapt because they have no choice. But the adaptation comes at a cost that accumulates over generations. You're beginning to understand that. Heroism in this world isn't about glory or adventure. It's about the desperate necessity of survival in a reality where the natural order includes creatures specifically designed to torture and kill humans. The heroes you've heard about, Perseus and Heracles and Theseus, they're not seeking fame. They're trying to create small pockets of safety in a world that's fundamentally hostile to human existence. But even the heroes fail more often than they succeed. For every monster they kill, there are dozens more breeding in the wilderness. For every threat they eliminate, new horrors emerge from the chaos that underlies reality. The best they can do is buy time, create temporary respites, push back the darkness for a few more years, and the gods, they're not helping. Many of these monsters are their creations, their pets, their instruments of punishment. The Sphinx was sent by Hera to torment Thebes. The Minotaur was the result of Poseidon's curse on Crete. The Hydra was raised by Hera specifically to kill Heracles. The gods don't see these creatures as problems to be solved. They see them as tools to be used, as entertainment, as ways to test mortals or punish them for imagined slights. You're realizing that the real horror of this world isn't just the individual monsters. It's the system that creates them, maintains them, and ensures that they'll always be a part of mortal existence. The gods could end this threat at any time, but they choose not to. They prefer a world where humans live in constant fear, where every day is a struggle against impossible odds, where parents have to watch their children be carried off by flying monsters and there's nothing they can do about it. This is your 4th day in Greek mythology, and you're beginning to understand that the monsters aren't the real enemy. They're just the symptoms of a deeper problem, a reality governed by beings who view human suffering as entertainment and human terror, as a natural resource to be harvested whenever they feel like it. But even this understanding won't save you, because knowledge of the system doesn't give you power over it. You're still mortal, still vulnerable, still trapped in a world where the next person you meet might turn you to stone with a glance, where the next shadow overhead might be a harpy looking for its next victim, where the next cave you pass might house something so terrible that even the gods fear to disturb it. The monsters are everywhere. They're patient and they're hungry. And you're beginning to realize that in this world, you're not the observer of these horrors. You're the prey on your 5th day in this mythological nightmare. You encounter something that gives you hope for the first time since you arrived. A real hero, not just someone who claims to be brave, but one of the legendary figures whose exploits are sung by bards across the ancient world. You meet Heracles himself, the strongest man who ever lived, the son of Zeus, the man who has completed impossible tasks and slain monsters that terrorized entire kingdoms. Finally, you think, here is someone who can navigate this world successfully. Here is proof that survival is possible, that the gods and monsters and cruel fates can be overcome through strength and determination. You attach yourself to Heracles' company, believing that proximity to such legendary heroism will provide safety. This is the most dangerous mistake you could make. You see, what you don't understand about heroes in Greek mythology is that they're not blessed with good fortune, they're cursed with it. Their legendary status doesn't come from their ability to avoid danger, but from their compulsion to seek it out. They're not survivors in any meaningful sense. They're spectacular failures, who happen to accomplish incredible things while destroying themselves and everyone around them. Heracles is the perfect example. Yes, he's the strongest man who ever lived. Yes, he's completed 12 impossible labors. But he's also a madman whose fits of rage have killed more innocents than most monsters. His strength is matched only by his instability, and his divine heritage hasn't protected him from a life of constant suffering. You learn this when you witness one of his episodes. It begins with something trivial, a servant spilling wine on his cloak. The man apologizes profusely, clearly terrified, but Heracles is already past the point of rational response. His face darkens, his muscles tense, and you can see the madness creeping into his eyes. The servant runs, but there's nowhere to go. Heracles catches him easily, and what follows is not a heroic act, but a brutal murder. The strongest man in the world beats a terrified servant to death with his bare hands, and there's nothing heroic about it. It's just violence, senseless and unstoppable. This is what Hera's curse has done to him. The goddess, enraged by her husband's infidelity, couldn't strike directly at Zeus, so she targeted his mortal son instead. She drove Heracles mad, and in his madness, he killed his own wife and children. The famous 12 labors weren't voluntary quests for glory. They were penance, tasks imposed by the oracle at Delphi to atone for his family's murder. But the labors haven't cured his madness. They've simply given it direction. Each impossible task he completes feeds his sense of superiority, his belief that normal rules don't apply to him. He's become addicted to violence, to proving his power over forces that would destroy ordinary mortals. He doesn't seek out monsters to protect people. He seeks them out because killing them is the only thing that makes him feel in control, and everyone around him pays the price. His companions in these adventures don't survive because they're not strong enough to keep up with his pace. They die in the conflicts he seeks out, or they're killed by the very monsters he's hunting, or they fall victim to his rage when it turns in their direction. You're beginning to understand that. Following a hero doesn't provide safety. It provides the opposite. Heroes in this world are magnets for trouble, cursed to face impossible challenges, doomed to lose everything they try to protect. They're not successful because they're smart or careful or blessed. They're successful because they're too insane to quit, too driven to consider the consequences, too obsessed with their own legend to care about the collateral damage they cause. But Heracles isn't even the worst example. That distinction belongs to Achilles, the greatest warrior who ever lived, the man whose name is synonymous with martial excellence. You might think that his legendary prowess would make him a valuable ally, someone whose protection would be worth seeking. You would be wrong. Achilles is invulnerable to physical harm, protected by divine favor and magical immunities. But he's also completely, utterly, irredeemably selfish. He doesn't fight for justice or to protect the innocent. He fights for glory, for the chance to prove his superiority, for the thrill of violence itself. He's more dangerous to his allies than to his enemies, because enemies expect him to try to kill them. When you meet Achilles, he's in the middle of one of his legendary rages, and the target isn't some monstrous enemy. It's Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek forces at Troy, who has taken a captive woman that Achilles claimed as his prize. Rather than fighting the Trojans, Achilles is threatening to abandon the entire war effort because he feels insulted. Think about this. Thousands of men are dying in a war that's lasted for 9 years. And the greatest warrior on the Greek side is having a tantrum because he can't have the specific slave he wanted. This is the hero whose legend will outlast civilizations, and he's behaving like a spoiled child who's been denied a toy. But it gets worse. When Achilles finally returns to the fighting, it's not because he's come to his senses or remembered his duty to his fellow soldiers. It's because his closest friend, Patroclus, has been killed by Hector, the greatest Trojan warrior. Achilles' grief transforms into something even more dangerous than his previous rage. A desire for revenge so intense that it consumes not just him but everyone around him. He kills Hector in single combat, which would be the end of most heroes' revenge. But Achilles isn't satisfied with his enemy's death. He ties Hector's body to his chariot and drags it around the walls of Troy, mutilating the corpse in full view of the dead man's family. He does this for 11 days, defiling the body of a man who was universally respected as honorable and brave. This is the behavior of a hero, the man whose name has become synonymous with excellence in battle. He's not just violent, he's sadistic. He doesn't just defeat his enemies, he humiliates them, degrades them, turns their deaths into public spectacles designed to feed his own ego. And the gods, they're appalled. Even the Olympians, who are not known for their mercy or restraint, are disgusted by Achilles' treatment of Hector's body. They force him to return the corpse to Priam, Hector's father, who has to beg for the privilege of burying his son. This is what heroism looks like in Greek mythology. It's not about virtue or protecting the innocent. It's about being so consumed by your own legend that you lose sight of everything else, including your own humanity. The heroes you've heard about in sanitized modern retellings are monsters wearing the masks of champions. They're not role models. They're cautionary tales about what happens when mortals are given just enough power to be dangerous, but not enough wisdom to use it responsibly. Consider Perseus, another legendary hero whose story is often told as a tale of triumph over adversity. He's the one who killed Medusa, who rescued the princess Andromeda, who founded great cities and left behind a legacy of heroic deeds. But look closer at his story, and you'll see the same pattern of violence and obsession that defines all Greek heroes. Perseus kills Medusa not out of noble purpose, but because he made a boastful promise he couldn't keep. He promised King Polydex that he would bring back the Gorgon's head as a wedding gift, not because he wanted to help anyone, but because he was trying to impress people with his bravery. It was a stupid, arrogant gesture that put him in mortal danger for no reason other than his own ego. The quest itself is successful only because the gods give him magical items that make it impossible to fail. Athena gives him a mirrored shield, Hermes gives him winged sandals, and Hades gives him a helmet of invisibility. Perseus doesn't win through his own skill or courage. He wins because the gods have decided to use him as their instrument, and they've equipped him with tools that make failure impossible. But even with divine assistance, Perseus's victory comes at a terrible cost. To find Medusa, he has to force the location from her sisters, the Gree, 3 ancient women who share a single eye and a single tooth between them. Perseus steals their eye and threatens to destroy it unless they tell him what he wants to know. He's torturing elderly women, threatening to leave them blind and helpless forever, all so he can continue his quest for personal glory. When he finally kills Medusa, he doesn't just take her head and leave. He uses it as a weapon, turning anyone who opposes him into stone. He petrifies an entire court when they refuse to believe his story. He turns a titan into a mountain range because the titan wouldn't give him shelter. He transforms his enemies into statues, not out of necessity, but out of convenience. This is the pattern with all Greek heroes. They're given incredible power, and they use it not to create justice or protect the innocent, but to impose their will on everyone around them. They're not heroes in any modern sense of the word. They're warlords with divine backing, conquerors, who justify their violence by claiming it serves some greater purpose. And the greatest tragedy is that the people around them believe the justifications. They celebrate these heroes, build monuments to them, tell stories about their great deeds. They don't see the trail of bodies, the innocent victims, the communities destroyed by heroic ambition. They see only the legend, the sanitized version, where the hero always fights for good and the violence is always justified. But you're seeing it from the inside now. You're witnessing what it's really like to be around these legendary figures. You're seeing how their presence doesn't bring safety, it brings chaos. How their quests don't solve problems, they create new ones. How their victories are always temporary, always paid for with blood. That's not their own. You're realizing that the real victims in these stories are not the monsters the heroes fight. The real victims are the ordinary people who get caught in the crossfire, who become collateral damage in someone else's quest for immortal glory. The servants who are killed for minor infractions, the communities that are destroyed because they happened to be in the wrong place when a hero needed to prove something, the families that are torn apart because their loved ones were sacrificed to fuel someone else's legend. This is your 5th day in Greek mythology, and you're learning that the heroes are not your salvation. They're another source of danger, another threat to be avoided. In a world where the gods are capricious and the monsters are everywhere, the heroes are the most dangerous of all, because they're the ones who convince themselves that their violence serves a noble purpose. They're the ones who will get you killed while believing they're saving you. Your 6th day in this mythological hell brings you face to face with a truth so disturbing that you almost wish you could return to your previous ignorance. If being a man in this world is dangerous, being a woman is a fate worse than death. The gods don't just punish women for their crimes, they punish them for their virtues. They don't just kill them, they transform them into cautionary tales. turning their suffering into eternal monuments to divine power. You encounter this reality when you meet a woman named Arachne, a weaver whose skill is so extraordinary that it seems to transcend mortal limitations. Her tapestries are works of art so beautiful that people travel from distant cities just to see them. She's proud of her ability, but not arrogantly so. She's simply a craftsperson who has dedicated her life to perfecting her art. But in the world of Greek mythology, female excellence is itself a crime. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and crafts, hears about Arachne's reputation and decides to test her. She appears to the mortal woman in the disguise of an old crone and warns her not to challenge the gods with her boasts. Arachne, who has made no boasts, simply stated that she's confident in her abilities, maintains that she's willing to compete with anyone, even a goddess. This is not hubris. This is simply the response of a master craftsperson who has spent years perfecting her skills. But in this world, female confidence is indistinguishable from blasphemy. Athena reveals her true form and challenges Arachne to a weaving contest. The mortal woman, despite her fear, accepts. She has no choice. To refuse would be to admit that her life's work is meaningless, that her art is inferior to divine creation. She has to compete, even though she understands that she's likely to die regardless of the outcome. The contest begins, and both women create tapestries of impossible beauty. Athena weaves scenes of the gods' glory, their victories over titans and monsters, their benevolent rule over mortals. It's technically perfect, a work of art that captures the official mythology, the version of reality that the gods want mortals to believe. But Arachne weaves something far more dangerous. She creates scenes of the gods' true nature, Zeus transforming into animals to rape mortal women, Poseidon violating priestesses in sacred temples, Apollo pursuing nymphs who flee in terror. Her tapestry is not just technically perfect, it's emotionally honest. It shows the gods as they really are, not as they want to be seen. Athena's reaction is swift and merciless. She can't deny that Arachne's work is superior, that the mortal woman has not only matched divine skill but exceeded it. So she destroys the tapestry and beats Arachne with her shuttle, then transforms her into a spider, condemned to weave forever, but never again to create art that challenges the gods. Authority, that this is the fate that awaits women who excel in this world, not recognition, not reward, but punishment for the crime of being better than their divine superiors. Arachne's transformation is not just a personal tragedy, it's a message to all mortal women. Your talents belong to the gods, and if you develop them too far, you'll lose your humanity itself. But Arachne's story is almost gentle compared to what happens to women who attract divine attention through their beauty. You witness this when you encounter Daphne, a nymph whose only crime is being so beautiful that Apollo notices her. She's not vain, she's not proud, she's simply unfortunate enough to possess the kind of beauty that gods find irresistible. Apollo sees her and immediately becomes obsessed. He pursues her through the forest, and his pursuit is not romantic courtship, but predatory hunting. He's not trying to win her affections, he's trying to catch her so he can rape her. This is what divine love looks like in Greek mythology, an act of violence disguised as romance. Daphne runs, but she can't outrun a god. Apollo is gaining on her, and she knows exactly what will happen when he catches her. In desperation, she prays to her father, the river god Peneus, begging him to save her from Apollo's lust. Her father responds by transforming her into a laurel tree, preserving her chastity by ending her humanity. Apollo, arriving too late to claim his prize, declares that since he can't possess Daphne as a woman, he'll claim her as a tree. He makes the laurel sacred to him, uses its leaves to crown victors in athletic competitions, ensures that her transformation becomes a permanent monument to his desire. Think about this for a moment. Daphne's best-case scenario, the outcome that her own father considered merciful, was to lose her human form forever. Death would have been preferable to rape, and transformation was preferable to death. This is the range of options available to women in this world: violation, death, or something worse than death. But even transformation doesn't guarantee safety. You learn this when you hear the story of Medusa, whose fate demonstrates that in Greek mythology, women are punished not just for their own actions, but for crimes committed against them. Medusa was once a beautiful priestess of Athena, dedicated to the goddess's service and sworn to lifelong chastity. She served faithfully in Athena's temple, maintaining the sacred flames and performing the rituals that honored the goddess. Her beauty was renowned, but she used it only in service to her divine mistress. Then Poseidon, god of the sea, saw her and decided he wanted her. He didn't court her. He didn't try to win her affections. He simply took her, raping her in Athena's own temple, defiling both the priestess and the sacred space she was sworn to protect. You might think that Athena would punish Poseidon for this violation, that she would defend her priestess and her temple from this assault. But gods don't punish other gods, even for the most heinous crimes. Instead, Athena punished Medusa for being raped, transforming her into a monster whose gaze turns mortals to stone. Medusa's beauty, which had attracted Poseidon's attention, became a curse that isolated her from all human contact. Her hair became writhing snakes. Her eyes became instruments of death. Her face became so terrible that no one could look at it and live. She was banished to a remote island where she lived in complete solitude, surrounded by the stone statues of those who had accidentally glimpsed her face. This is divine justice in action. The victim of rape becomes the monster, while the rapist continues to rule the seas without consequence. Medusa's transformation is not just punishment, it's a warning to all women. If you are violated, you will be held responsible. If you are victimized, you will be made monstrous. And the cruelest part of Medusa's fate is that she retains her human consciousness throughout her transformation. She knows what she's become, she remembers what she was, and she's aware that everyone who looks at her will die. She's not just a monster, she's a prisoner trapped in a monstrous form, forced to kill anyone who might offer her companionship or comfort. When Perseus finally kills her, it's not a mercy, it's simply the final act in a tragedy that began with her rape and continued through her transformation. Her death is celebrated as a heroic victory, but from her perspective, it's just the end of a life that was destroyed by forces beyond her control. This is what it means to be a woman in Greek mythology. Your beauty is a curse that will attract divine attention. Your talents are threats that will provoke divine wrath. Your virtues are weaknesses that will be exploited by gods and mortals alike. And when you're victimized, you'll be blamed for your own suffering. Transformed into a cautionary tale about the dangers of female ambition or beauty or independence. The women in these stories are not characters, they're objects. They exist, to be pursued, possessed, transformed, and discarded. Their pain is entertainment. Their deaths are plot devices. Their suffering is justified by their supposed crimes against the natural order. You're beginning to understand that the real horror of this world is not just the random violence, or the capricious gods, or the inescapable fate. The real horror is the systematic brutality directed at anyone who doesn't fit the narrow definition of acceptable behavior, and the way that brutality is justified by those who benefit from it. The gods don't just rule through fear, they rule through the creation of a social order where victims are blamed for their own suffering, where excellence is punished as hubris, where survival requires the acceptance of your own powerlessness. And tomorrow, on your 7th day in this nightmare, you'll discover that even understanding this system won't save you from it. Your 7th day in this mythological wasteland begins with a realization that breaks something fundamental in your mind. You're not just witnessing these horrors, you're becoming part of them. The constant exposure to divine cruelty, inescapable fate, and systematic brutality has begun to change you in ways that you're only now beginning to understand. You notice it first in your reactions to the suffering around you. When you see a man turned to stone by a Gorgon's glance, you don't feel the same shock and horror that you felt on your first day. Instead, you feel a kind of weary acceptance, a sense that this is simply how things work in this world. You're developing the same emotional numbness that allows the people here to function in the face of constant horror. But numbness is not adaptation. It's the first stage of a psychological breakdown that will destroy everything you once believed about morality, justice, and the nature of reality itself. You encounter this process in its advanced stages when you meet Pentheus, the young king of Thebes who has made the fatal mistake of denying the divinity of Dionysus. You might think this is another story about divine punishment for human arrogance. But what you witness is something far more disturbing: the systematic destruction of a man's mind by a god who enjoys psychological torture. Pentheus is not particularly arrogant or evil. He's simply a young ruler trying to maintain order in his city when strange reports begin to reach him. Women are abandoning their homes and families to join mysterious religious rites in the mountains. They're engaging in behavior that violates every social norm, dancing wildly, drinking wine, claiming to be possessed by divine ecstasy. As King Pentheus has a responsibility to investigate these reports. When he does, he finds that the women, including his own mother and aunts, have been transformed into something that barely resembles humanity. They're in a state of religious frenzy so intense that they've lost all connection to their previous lives. They don't recognize their own families, they don't remember their obligations. They exist only to serve the will of Dionysus. This is not spiritual enlightenment. This is madness, imposed by a god who finds human suffering amusing. Pentheus tries to restore order, to bring the women back to their senses, to protect his city from what he correctly identifies as a dangerous cult. But Dionysus isn't interested in converting Pentheus to his worship. He's interested in destroying him, slowly and completely, in a way that will serve as entertainment for the god and a warning to others. The destruction begins with temptation. Dionysus appears to Pentheus in human form and offers him a chance to spy on the women's rights. He plays on the young king's curiosity, his sense of duty, his natural human desire to understand what's happening in his kingdom. He makes the offer seem reasonable, even necessary. But this is a trap designed to exploit Pentheus's virtues against him. His sense of responsibility becomes the weapon that Dionysus uses to destroy him. The god convinces Pentheus to dress as a woman to avoid detection, to hide in the trees where he can observe the rites without being seen. What Pentheus witnesses in the mountains is not religious worship, but something that resembles a collective psychotic break. The women, including his own mother, Agave, are tearing apart live animals with their bare hands, eating raw flesh, engaging in acts of violence and madness that would be horrifying even by the standards of this brutal world. But Pentheus's horror at what he sees is nothing compared to what happens when he's discovered. The women, in their divine madness, see him not as a person, but as a wild animal, a threat to be eliminated. They attack him with supernatural strength, and what follows is not just murder, but the complete destruction of his identity. His mother Agave leads the attack. She doesn't recognize her own son. The divine madness has erased her maternal instincts, her human connections, everything that made her a person rather than a weapon in Dionysus's hands. She tears off Pentheus's head with her bare hands, believing she's killed a lion, a monster that threatened the god's followers. She returns to Thebes, carrying her son's head as a trophy, proud of her victory over the beast. It's only when her father, Cadmus, forces her to look closely at what she's holding that she realizes she's killed her own child. The moment of recognition, when the divine madness lifts enough for her to understand what she's done, is perhaps the most horrific scene in all of Greek mythology. Dionysus has forced a mother to kill her own son and be proud of it. He's taken the most fundamental human bond, the connection between parent and child, and turned it into an instrument of torture. And he's done it not because Pentheus was evil, but because he was human, because he tried to maintain order in a world where chaos is divine will. This is what the gods do to mortals who resist them. They don't just kill them, they destroy their humanity first. They turn their virtues into weaknesses, their love into weapons, their sanity into a prison from which escape is impossible. But Pentheus's story is not unique. You're seeing this pattern everywhere now, this systematic destruction of human psychology by beings who view mortal suffering as entertainment. The gods don't just punish, they corrupt. They don't just kill, they drive their victims insane first. You witness this again when you encounter Cassandra, the Trojan priestess who has been cursed with the gift of prophecy. She can see the future with perfect clarity, but no one will ever believe her warnings. This might sound like a minor inconvenience, but you're about to discover that it's actually a form of psychological torture so refined that it borders on artistic cruelty. Cassandra knows that Troy will fall. She knows that the wooden horse contains Greek soldiers. She knows that her family will be killed, her city will be destroyed, her people will be enslaved. She can see every detail of the coming catastrophe, and she's compelled to warn everyone, even though she knows they won't listen. Imagine what this does to a person's mind. You have perfect knowledge of terrible events, but you're powerless to prevent them. You watch people you love walk toward their deaths, and your attempts to save them only convince them that you're mad. You become a prophet of doom whose prophecies are always accurate but never believed. This is Apollo's revenge on Cassandra for rejecting his sexual advances. He gave her the gift of prophecy as a seduction technique, and when she still refused him, he cursed her so that her gift would become a source of constant torment. She has divine knowledge, but it's knowledge that serves no purpose except to increase her own suffering. The curse is perfectly designed to exploit Cassandra's compassion against her. Her love for her family and her city becomes the source of her torment. Every day she sees new visions of their deaths, and every day she's compelled to warn them, even though she knows it's futile. When Troy finally falls, when her prophecies are proven accurate, there's no vindication, no moment when people realize she was right all along. By then, everyone who dismissed her warnings is dead, and her knowledge has become irrelevant. She's enslaved by the Greeks, taken as a concubine by Agamemnon, and eventually murdered by his wife Clytemnestra. Her gift of prophecy, which should have been a blessing, becomes the instrument of her psychological destruction. She lives her entire life knowing exactly how it will end, powerless to change it, watching everyone she loves dismiss her warnings as madness. This is what you're becoming in this world, not physically transformed like Medusa or Arachne, but psychologically twisted by constant exposure to horrors that defy human understanding. You're developing the same 1,000-yard stare that you see in the eyes of everyone who has survived here for more than a few days. You're learning to accept the unacceptable, to rationalize the irrational, to find ways to function in a reality where nothing makes sense and nothing is safe. You're becoming complicit in the system that's destroying you, because the alternative is complete madness, and the most terrifying part is that you're starting to understand the God's perspective. When you see mortals suffering, you're beginning to think of them as characters in a story rather than as people. When you witness divine cruelty, you're starting to appreciate its artistry rather than its evil. You're becoming one of them, not in power but in perspective. You're losing your humanity not through divine transformation but through psychological adaptation to an inhuman world. This is your 7th day in Greek mythology, and you're beginning to realize that the greatest horror is not what this world does to your body. It's what it does to your soul. Your 8th and final day in this mythological nightmare begins with a revelation that shatters the last remnants of your sanity. You've been here before, not just metaphorically, not just as a witness to these horrors, but literally. You've lived through this exact sequence of events countless times, and each time you've forgotten everything when you died and started over. This is the ultimate cruelty of the Greek mythological world. Even death is not an escape. Even oblivion is denied to those who displease the gods. You are trapped in an eternal cycle of suffering, doomed to repeat the same horrific experiences forever. Never learning from your mistakes because you can. Never remember making them. You discover this truth when you meet the Fates, the 3 sisters who control the threads of destiny. Clotho spins the thread of life, Lachesis measures its length, and Atropos cuts it when death arrives. They are ancient beyond measure, older than the gods themselves, and they remember everything that has ever happened in this world, including your previous visits. You again, Atropos says when she sees you, her voice carrying the weight of infinite weariness. How many times has it been now? 1,000, 10,000. We've lost count. You don't understand what she means, but Lachesis explains with the casual cruelty that characterizes all divine beings in this world. You're not unique, mortal. You're not special. You're just another thread in the tapestry, doomed to repeat the same pattern over and over again because you can never learn what you need to learn. The truth unfolds before you like a map of hell. You've been trapped in this world for millennia, dying and being reborn, living through the same sequence of horrors again and again. Sometimes you're killed by monsters, sometimes by gods, sometimes by heroes, sometimes by your own despair. But death never frees you from this place. Instead, you're returned to the beginning, stripped of your memories, but not of your essential nature. You make the same mistakes, react to the same stimuli, follow the same patterns that led to your destruction the last time. You're not learning from experience because you can't remember your experiences. Why, you ask, and the question comes out as a broken whisper. Why am I trapped here? What did I do to deserve this? Clotho laughs, a sound like breaking glass. Deserve? You think this is about deserving? You're here because the gods are bored. You're here because they enjoy watching mortals struggle against impossible odds. You're here because your suffering entertains them. This is the final truth about Greek mythology. It's not a moral universe where good is rewarded and evil is punished. It's not a testing ground where mortals can prove their worth. It's a game preserve where immortal beings hunt mortal souls for sport. The gods don't rule through justice or even through fear. They rule through the creation of an eternal entertainment system where mortal suffering is the primary source of divine amusement. Every hero's quest, every monster's rampage, every tragic fate is carefully orchestrated to provide maximum entertainment value to beings who have eternity to fill and nothing better to do than watch lesser beings destroy themselves. You're not a protagonist in your own story. You're a piece on a game board, moved around by players whose motivations you can't understand and whose rules you can't learn. And when the game ends, when you're finally killed by whatever horror the gods have arranged for you, the board is reset and the game begins again. But now you remember. For the first time in countless cycles, you retain the knowledge of what you've experienced. You can see the pattern, understand the trap, recognize the futility of resistance. And this knowledge, which should be liberating, is actually the cruelest punishment of all, because now you know that nothing you do matters. Every choice you make, every action you take, every moment of hope or despair or triumph or defeat is meaningless. You're not changing your fate, you're just acting out a role that was written for you before you were born. The heroes you've encountered, the monsters you've faced, the gods you feared, they're all part of an elaborate performance designed to extract the maximum amount of suffering from your mortal existence. They're not real characters with their own motivations and desires. They're actors playing roles in a drama that has no purpose except to torment you. Even this revelation, this moment of understanding, is part of the script. The gods have allowed you to remember because they want to see how you'll react when you understand the truth. They're curious about whether knowledge will make you more interesting to watch, whether despair will produce a different kind of suffering than ignorance. You look around at the world you've been trapped in, and you see it with new eyes. The marble temples are not monuments to divine glory. They're sets in a cosmic theater. The heroes are not champions of justice. They're performers hired to create dramatic tension. The monsters are not obstacles to be overcome. They're special effects designed to generate fear and excitement. And the other mortals, the ones you've tried to help, the ones you've watched suffer and die, they're not real people anymore than you are. They're characters in the same play, trapped in the same cycle, doomed to repeat the same performances for the amusement of immortal audiences. This is why you wouldn't last a day in Greek mythology. Not because you're weak or foolish or unprepared, but because lasting is not the point. The point is to provide entertainment through your suffering, to create dramatic tension through your struggles, to generate emotional responses through your defeats. You were never meant to survive. You were meant to die spectacularly and repeatedly, in ways that would amuse beings who have seen everything and been bored by most of it. And now, with this knowledge burning in your mind like acid, you face the final choice of your existence. You can try to break the cycle, to find some way to escape this eternal prison, knowing that escape is impossible because the game is rigged. Or you can accept your fate, stop fighting, and allow the performance to continue without resistance. But even this choice is an illusion. The gods have orchestrated this moment, this revelation, this decision. They want to see what you'll do when you understand the truth. They're waiting to see if knowledge will make you more interesting to watch, or if it will break you in a way that provides a new kind of entertainment. You realize that there is no escape from Greek mythology because there is no outside. This is not a world you can leave, it's a reality you're trapped in. The gods are not characters in a story, they're the authors of your existence. The monsters are not obstacles to overcome, they're the instruments of your eternal punishment. And you, despite all your knowledge and understanding and desperate desire for freedom, are nothing more than words on a page, actions in a play, movements in a dance that will continue long after you've forgotten that you ever existed. The sun sets on your 8th day in this mythological hell, and you prepare to die again, knowing that tomorrow you'll wake up with no memory of what you've learned, ready to begin the cycle once more. But this time, as the darkness closes in, you hear something that chills you more than any monster's roar or God's curse. The sound of divine laughter, echoing across the heavens. As immortal beings, prepare to watch your performance begin again. This is why you wouldn't last a day in Greek mythology, because in this world, lasting is not surviving. It's being condemned to an eternity of deaths, each one more meaningless than the last. Each one designed to entertain beings who see your suffering as the highest form of art. Welcome to Greek mythology. You've been here before, and you'll be here again, forever. And the gods wouldn't have it any other way. As consciousness fades, and you prepare to die for the 1000th time, you catch a glimpse of the ultimate truth that underlies all of Greek mythology. These stories were never meant to be inspirational tales of heroism and triumph. They were warnings, messages from a civilization that understood something fundamental about the nature of existence that we have forgotten. The Greeks knew that life is not fair, that virtue is not rewarded, that the universe is indifferent to human suffering. They created these myths not to comfort themselves with lies about divine justice, but to prepare themselves for the harsh realities of existence in a world where power and cruelty often go hand in hand. Every god in these stories represents a force of nature that cannot be reasoned with, negotiated with, or defeated. Zeus is not a benevolent father figure, he's the raw power of the storm, indifferent to whether his lightning strikes the innocent or the guilty. Poseidon is not a protector of sailors, he's the ocean itself, beautiful and terrible and utterly alien to human concerns. The heroes are not role models, they're warnings about what happens when mortals are given just enough power to be dangerous, but not enough wisdom to use it responsibly. They're cautionary tales about the corrupting influence of violence, the addictive nature of glory, the way that exceptional individuals often become isolated from the very humanity they claim to protect. The monsters are not obstacles to be overcome. They're representations of the chaotic forces that exist at the edges of civilization, always ready to break through and destroy everything that mortals have built. They're reminders that the order we create is fragile, temporary, and ultimately meaningless in the face of forces that are older and stronger than human civilization. And the mortals, the ordinary people who populate these stories, are us. They're representations of what it means to be human in a universe that doesn't care about human values, human needs, or human survival. They struggle and suffer and die not because they're weak or foolish, but because they're caught in a reality that operates according to rules they didn't create and can't change. This is why these stories have survived for thousands of years, not because they're comforting, but because they're true. They capture something essential about the human condition that no amount of progress or enlightenment or technological advancement can change. We are still mortals in a world of forces beyond our control. We still face arbitrary punishment, inescapable fate, and the knowledge that our lives are brief and fragile in a universe that will continue long after we're gone. We still struggle to find meaning in suffering, to maintain hope in the face of despair, to create order in a reality that tends toward chaos. The gods may have different names now, and the monsters may wear different faces, but the fundamental challenges remain the same. We still must navigate a world where power is often divorced from wisdom, where virtue is not always rewarded, where the innocent suffer and the guilty prosper. The difference is that we've forgotten the lessons that the Greeks tried to teach us. We've sanitized their stories, turned their warnings into entertainment, transformed their harsh truths into comfortable lies. We've convinced ourselves that we're different, that we're special, that we can escape the fate that befell every generation before us. But Greek mythology reminds us that we are not exempt from the laws that govern mortal existence. We are not the protagonists of reality, we are not destined for victory, and we are not guaranteed a happy ending. We are human beings in a universe that is beautiful and terrible, and utterly indifferent to our hopes and fears. This is the final lesson of Greek mythology. Not that we should despair, but that we should accept. Not that we should give up, but that we should continue fighting even when we know that victory is impossible. Not that we should become cynical, but that we should find meaning in the struggle itself, rather than in its outcome. The Greeks faced the same existential challenges that we face today, and they responded not with denial or false hope, but with stories that captured the full complexity of human existence. Their myths remind us that we are part of something larger than ourselves, something that will continue long after we're gone, something that gives meaning to our brief existence, even in the face of inevitable death. So as you return to your own world, remember what you've learned in this mythological realm. Remember that the gods are still watching, that the monsters are still hunting, that fate is still weaving its web around your life. But remember also that you are human, and that being human means something even in a universe that doesn't care about human values. You wouldn't last a day in Greek mythology, not because you're weak, but because you're mortal. And being mortal, in a world governed by immortal forces, is the most heroic thing you can be. The performance continues, the cycle repeats, and the gods still laugh at mortal suffering. But in that laughter, in that eternal return, in that endless repetition of struggle and defeat and renewal, there is something that even the gods cannot touch. The human capacity to find meaning in meaninglessness, to create beauty in the face of horror, to love in a world that seems designed to destroy everything we hold dear. This is why the stories survive. This is why they matter. This is why, despite everything, we continue to tell them. Because even in a world where we wouldn't last a day, the fact that we try to last at all is the most divine thing about us. The gods may be immortal, but they will never understand what it means to be human. And that, perhaps, is the only victory that mortals can ever truly claim. Good night, and may you never find yourself in the realm of Greek mythology, where the gods are always watching, and they are never kind.